My name is Taiwo Oyedele. I'm the Research Director for the NESG Fiscal Policy Roundtable and a partner with PwC. With support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the NESG conducted a study, and we thought that it's not enough to say that tax to GDP ratio is low, but why is it low, and what can we do about it? So currently we have somewhere over 70 million Nigerians that are economically active, but the number of people who are in the tax net and paying taxes are somewhere around 10 million. I do know that the Joint Tax Board and the FRS have been trying to increase the number of people in the tax net, but we're not seeing the results sufficiently enough in terms of the taxes that they are paying.
Okay, I'm going to wear two hats today. I'll talk as the chairman of the Joint Tax Board, which means both the corporate and the individual taxpayers, and I also talk as FIRS. Basically, in FIRS, for example, we have simplified the process. You can pay your taxes online anywhere in the world. You can download your receipts. In short, you can carry out all your tax requirements or activities without even coming to a tax office or talking to any tax official. It's as simple and as transparent as that. Now, as a member of the Joint Tax Board, we have allowed the states, internal revenue services, to see the changes that we have made. And you've got to realize that after coming out of military rule, and you come up with an issue of taxation, I can assure you that if you're not careful, you will not win the next election. So the civilian governors also play a bit more, too much politics when it comes to taxation, and not realizing that, listen, they have to take that risk. Tax the people within hopefully 2 years, show them the impact or the effect it can have. And that's what Lagos did. And even with the increased number of taxpayers, they were still able to, the party was still able to win another election. But in a situation whereby you enforce tax and you cannot deliver timely, and it takes time. You get your money today, you get your budget approved, apart from maybe building a short road, things like hospitals, schools, apart from the physical structure, there's also the soft element of the personnel to run your hospital, to run your school. So it's not something that can be done overnight. And when you look at the fact that governors have 4 years and they're hoping to serve 2 terms, they have to try and balance between taxation and also winning the next election. Then we have another situation whereby governors don't actually understand the potential they have in their respective states.
ACCA does a lot of work surveying and looking at the global landscape for taxation. And it's certainly, we've come down to 3 principles which sound easy but are extremely difficult to apply, which are simplicity, certainty and stability that are needed in any taxation system. And just the very simple questions around why tax in itself is important, as you said. I think the understanding of that has to be embedded in order for a taxation system to work. So there's the financial imperative, which is probably obvious, that private players are not going to pay for huge infrastructure development and investment that any nation will need. The social aspect, which I think is less well understood, so paying taxes is about buying into society, whether you're a corporate or an individual. It really is about that, I'm part of this and I'm going to help make it work. So I think there's a social aspect. And then just the very facts and figures. As you said right at the beginning, Taiwo, it's well known that the ratio of taxation revenue to GDP in Nigeria is low. There's a lot of evidence from the IMF, long-term research reports, that economic growth relates to a high ratio of tax return to GDP. So they estimate around 13% is required before you start to see economic growth. So there's a real economic imperative there as well.
There needs to be a longer perspective, because it's not about reaching 20% tax to GDP or 15%, it's about how do we get there. And I think that long-term perspective is necessary for any investor, and probably Eme will talk about that. Sometimes my shareholders are asking me, well, what is the taxation next year? I don't know. So that clarity needs to come, not just about the target, but how we get there. And this is very important, simplicity and target. And the final one is, I don't think Nigeria can wait all this time. I don't think it can wait for all these years to raise the capabilities, raise the taxes and I don't think it can continue targeting the few. So the solution might be also to do the PPP. Companies might be willing to invest in a road, and consumers might be willing to pay for that road. And I think that provides a lot of opportunities. At some point, the government needs to decide what is my size, and not try to be Norway, where we all know, well, okay, it's 50% tax to GDP, but we will never get there. So what's the horizon for Nigerian government, and how can we get there? And I think one of the solutions is rely on the private companies. We are willing to do a lot of the things because we see a lot of opportunities here.
I think we all recognize how small the Nigerian government is relative to GDP. The flip side of that is that we have a large private sector, so the private sector can do a lot. But the government is small, and the government is small because the government isn't collecting taxes, and the government isn't collecting taxes, therefore the government isn't spending. And so Nigeria then, as a result, has one of the worst infrastructure efficiency gaps that we've seen globally. There isn't sufficient infrastructure in this country to do half of what we need to do, a fraction of what we need to do. Nigeria is lagging behind on almost every indicator when it comes to infrastructure. And we've seen actually a decline in this over the last few years. And so when you look at the picture then, you say, well, how do you solve that problem? Part of it is you can raise money through the capital markets. The other way is to address capital raising or revenue raising through taxes. So this has got to be the critical issue going forward. The only way Nigeria can address the massive infrastructure gap that will then give the average Nigerian a sense that there's improvement is if there's investment in infrastructure. So this is the vicious cycle I think that we need to address going forward.
Things are changing, even at the state level. I mean, we're not there yet, but tax collection is improving because most governors don't have the resources, so they sit on the chairman of the Internal Revenue Service on a day-to-day basis and monitor what is going on every day and ask questions about what they're doing to improve on tax collection, what we're also doing to improve on service delivery to the constituents. Yes, we have infrastructure deficit, and we really need to do a lot to improve on that. But is spending money recruiting teachers and nurses, is that required? I mean, I don't know where it falls. It's a significant expenditure that states must take, even if it requires spending more money. I mean, I'm recruiting 2,000 teachers in my state. We need to figure out how to expand this economy, whether you see it as 6% of the tax GDP or you see in effective tax, as Eme mentioned. I think even if states are not doing enough and government is not doing enough in service delivery, the alternative should not necessarily be to have unofficial effective taxes in what you do for yourself. How do you measure it? I think we need to close the gap and improve on people paying proper taxes, preferably more of indirect taxes that they wouldn't feel, and rather than depend on alternative ways of paying taxes.